The crystalline towers of Valthari Prime sparkled like diamonds against the purple sky. But their beauty meant nothing now. Ambassador Nithara pressed her thin, six-fingered hands against the emergency communication panel as another explosion shook the building. Through the transparent walls, she could see the nightmare approaching. The void swarm moved like a living shadow across the city. Biomechanical creatures the size of buildings crawled through the streets, their metal organic bodies shifting and changing as they consumed everything in their path. They looked like giant insects made of dark metal and pulsing flesh, with too many legs and eyes that glowed red in the darkness. "This is Ambassador Nithara of the Zephyrian Collective." She spoke into the communicator, trying to keep her voice steady. "We are under attack. Our people are dying. The void swarm has reached our home world. Please, anyone who can hear this message, we need help." Her skin, normally a soft blue color, flickered with patterns of light that showed her fear. This was how her people communicated emotions, and right now, terror painted her entire body in flashing warning colors. The swarm had appeared 3 months ago, at the edge of their territory. At first, the Zephyrian military thought they could handle it. They were wrong. The creatures learned from every attack. When the Zephyrians used laser weapons, the swarm grew reflective armor. When they tried missiles, the creatures developed point defense systems. When they used biological weapons, the swarm simply absorbed them and became stronger. 17 star systems had fallen. Billions of peaceful beings had died. The swarm consumed not just the people, but entire planets, breaking them down into raw materials to build more of themselves. "Emergency broadcast to all civilized worlds," Nithara continued, watching through the window as evacuation ships tried to escape the planet's gravity well. Some made it. Too many did not. The void swarm cannot be stopped by conventional means. It adapts to every weapon, every strategy. We have lost everything. Please, someone help us. The first response came quickly. The Ethereal Dominion, one of the galaxy's most powerful civilizations, sent a cold message. After careful analysis, we determined that military intervention would result in unacceptable losses. Requests denied. Nithara's hope dimmed like a dying star. The Ethereals commanded fleets of ships that could destroy suns. If they would not help, who would? More responses arrived, each one crushing her spirit further. The Silicon Hegemony, masters of perfect battle calculations, replied, "Our computers show 0 probability of victory. We will not sacrifice our forces." The Crystal Confederation was brief. "The swarm presents too great a risk. We must protect our own worlds." Even the ancient Wardenser Republic, legendary for their warrior culture, refused. "This enemy is beyond our capabilities. We are sorry." As the hours passed, Nithara realized the terrible truth. The galaxy's greatest civilizations, with all their advanced technology and mighty fleets, were afraid. The Void Swarm had done something no enemy in recorded history had accomplished. It had made the entire galaxy cower in fear. Outside, the last of the crystal spires collapsed. The swarm creatures moved through the rubble like hungry beasts, their forms shifting and adapting even as she watched. Some grew wings to chase the fleeing ships. Others developed new weapons to tear through defensive barriers. They were perfect killing machines, and they never stopped learning. Nithara prepared to send one final message, a farewell to any species that might remember the Zephyrian people after they were gone. Her fingers trembled over the controls. Then, as she began to speak, a new signal cut through the communication channels. It came from a distant part of the galaxy, from a small star system she had never heard of before. Message received. Ambassador. Fleet en route. Hold on. The voice was different from any she had heard before. It was rough, determined, and strangely warm despite the cold emptiness of space. Most galactic communications were perfectly translated by universal systems. but this one carried an accent she could not identify. Nithara quickly accessed the galactic database, searching for information about the signal's origin. The system was called Sol, located in what most civilizations considered the galaxy's backwater region. The dominant species was listed as human, with a classification that made her blood run cold. Warning: Deathworld species. Extreme caution. Advised. Do not engage without proper authorization. She read further, her large eyes growing wider with each line. Earth, the human homeworld, was classified as a Class 12 death world. The gravity would crush most galactic citizens. The weather systems were described as violently unpredictable. The dominant species had evolved from persistence predators, who hunted their prey by chasing them until they collapsed from exhaustion. The humans had survived on a planet that tried to kill them every single day. They had fought wars against their own environment and won. Their military history was filled with impossible victories against overwhelming odds. As another building collapsed outside her window, Nithara wondered if she had just invited something worse than the void swarm to their aid, but it was too late to worry about that now. Help was coming, whether she was ready for it or not. 3 days passed like a nightmare. Nithara had barely slept, watching through her shelter's damaged walls as more swarm creatures poured from the sky. The biomechanical monsters had taken most of the city now, their metal flesh bodies crawling over the broken crystal towers like giant spiders. Then, space itself seemed to tear apart. Bright flashes of light appeared at the edge of the star system, growing larger as something massive pushed through hyperspace. Nithara had seen many fleets arrive over the years during diplomatic meetings. The ethereal ships came like floating dreams, all smooth curves and glowing energy. The silicon vessels were perfect geometric shapes, cold and precise. But these ships were different. They dropped out of hyperspace like angry metal beasts, dark and scarred from countless battles. Their hulls were thick and angular, covered in weapon ports that looked more like teeth than technology. Some ships showed blast marks and patched holes from old fights. These were not parade vessels or diplomatic cruisers. These were warships that had seen real combat. The largest ship moved toward the planet, and Nithara's communicator crackled to life. A face appeared on her screen that made her step back in surprise. The human looked older than most species lived, with short gray hair and dark eyes that seemed to carry the weight of many wars. His skin was weathered like old leather, marked with small scars. But when he spoke, his voice was gentle. Ambassador Naichara. This is Admiral Lee Deho of the Terran Defense Fleet. We received your call for help. How many civilian ships are still on the planet? Nithara tried to speak, but only managed a small sound. The human waited patiently, not rushing her. Finally, she found her voice. Admiral Lee, there are maybe 50,000 people left in the shelters. But you do not understand what you are facing. The swarm learns from every attack. It has destroyed the fleets of 17 star systems. Even the ethereal Dominion would not fight them. The human's expression did not change. We read your reports, Ambassador. The swarm thinks like a computer. It studies patterns and adapts to them. He paused, and something that might have been a smile touched his lips. The thing is, we do not fight like computers. Behind the Admiral, another human appeared. This one was younger, a woman with short black hair and eyes that seemed to see everything at once. Her uniform was torn in places and marked with old burn scars. Admiral, swarm scouts are moving toward the outer moons. We have about 6 hours before they reach full attack formation, the woman reported. Thank you, Captain Park Minho, Lee said. Then he turned back to Neith. Ambassador, we need you to get your people to the evacuation points we are sending to your system. Can you do that? But the swarm will adapt to your weapons, Nithara said desperately. They always do. Every species that has fought them has learned this too late. Admiral Lee was quiet for a moment, looking at something off screen. When he spoke again, his voice was harder, like steel wrapped in cloth. Ambassador, do you know why our planet is called a death world? Nithara shook her head. Because for millions of years, Earth tried to kill us. Ice ages, volcanic eruptions, meteors, predators, diseases, hurricanes that could level cities. But we did not just survive. We learned to fight back. We learned that sometimes the only way to win is to do something so crazy that your enemy cannot predict it. On her scanner, Nithara could see the human fleet spreading out in formation. But it was not like any battle formation she had ever studied. The ships moved in patterns that seemed random, almost chaotic. The swarm adapts because it expects logical attacks, Captain Park said, stepping closer to the screen. But humans do not always fight logically. Sometimes we do things that make no sense, that no computer would ever calculate. Your people, Nithar whispered, watching the fleet prepare for battle. Are you all warriors? Admiral Lee shook his head. No, most of us are farmers, teachers, builders, parents. But when someone calls for help, we come. That is what humans do, even for strangers, even for people you have never met, especially for strangers, the Admiral said simply. Because if we do not help each other, who will? Through her window, Nithara could see the first swarm creatures turning toward space. Sensing the new threat, they began to change, growing new weapons and armor as they prepared to face the human fleet. She had seen this happen before. The swarm would study the humans, learn their patterns, and adapt until victory was impossible. But as she watched the human ships move in their strange, unpredictable dance around her world, she felt something she had not experienced in months. Hope. Maybe these Deathworlders really were different. Maybe they could do what no other species had managed. Maybe they could fight an enemy that learned from every battle and somehow find a way to win. All ships, this is Admiral Lee, came the voice over the communication channels. Remember why? We are here. We are not fighting to win glory or territory. We are fighting to save lives. Time to show these creatures why Earth spent so long trying to make us stronger. The battle was about to begin. The first human attack made no sense at all. Commander Kim Myre led 12 fighter ships toward the swarm formation. But instead of targeting the enemy vessels, she fired all her missiles into empty space. The explosions created a cloud of metal, debris that served no tactical purpose that any military computer could understand. Nithara watched from her shelter, confused and terrified. What are they doing? She whispered into her communicator. They are wasting their ammunition, Admiral. Lee's voice came back, calm and steady. Wait for it, Ambassador. The swarm creatures moved exactly as they always did, flowing around the debris cloud in perfect formation. They had learned from fighting 17 different species that obstacles were meant to be avoided or destroyed efficiently. Their biomechanical bodies began shifting, growing new sensors to navigate around the scattered metal. That was when Kim Murray's trap activated. Hidden in the debris were magnetic mines, so small that the swarm's sensors had dismissed them as harmless fragments. When the creatures moved close, the mines latched onto their metal parts and exploded. 6 swarm ships died in brilliant flashes of light. The first rule of fighting humans, Admiral Lee explained, as Nithara stared in amazement, is that we cheat, we lie, we set traps that look like mistakes. But the swarm was already adapting. The surviving creatures grew thicker armor and better sensors. They would not fall for the same trick twice. The humans did not use the same trick twice. Lieutenant Cho Hensel's fighter had taken heavy damage from swarm bioweapons, his left wing torn away and his engines failing. Any logical pilot would retreat to the safety of the fleet. Instead, Hansel turned his dying ship directly toward the largest swarm vessel. Hansel pulled back. Captain Park's voice crackled over the radio. Negative, Captain. I have a shot at their command node. Tell my wife I kept my promise. Nithara watched in horror as the human pilot flew straight into the enemy ship. his fighter exploding against the swarm vessel's hull. For a moment, she thought it was a pointless sacrifice. Then she saw the secondary explosions ripple through the creature's body as its command systems failed. The swarm had never encountered an enemy that would deliberately destroy itself for tactical advantage. Their learning algorithms had no data for such behavior. "Your pilot," Nithara said, her voice shaking. "He killed himself." "He saved lives," Admiral Lee corrected. "That command ship was coordinating the attack on your evacuation shuttles." Hansel knew what he was doing. On the tactical display, more human ships were engaging the swarm in ways that defied every rule of space combat. Captain Songji, marine transport, actually docked with a swarm bioship, allowing her soldiers to board the enemy vessel. "That is impossible," Nithara breathed. "No one boards swarm ships. They are full of acid and toxic gases." But the humans had brought their own atmosphere in sealed suits, and they fought through the organic corridors with weapons that sprayed fire and explosive charges. The swarm creature tried to seal the passages and trap the invaders, but the Marines simply blew new holes in the walls. The bioship writhed in space like a wounded animal as the humans carved their way toward its core systems. When they reached the creature's brain center, they planted fusion charges and fought their way back to their transport ship. "Song, get your people out of there," Admiral Lee ordered. 30 seconds, Admiral. We are almost clear." The explosion lit up space like a small sun. The swarm ship died, but not before releasing clouds of biospores that would have infected nearby vessels. The human Marines had stopped that threat at the cost of their own lives. "Why do they keep doing this?" Nithara asked, tears running down her face. "Why do your people keep dying for us?" "Because that is what humans do," Captain Park answered from her position on the bridge. "We protect others, even if it costs us everything." The battle continued for 6 hours, and the swarm grew more confused with each engagement. Every time they adapted to a human tactic, the humans changed to something completely different. Major Yoon Seojin used her destroyer's engines to create a solar flare effect, blinding swarm sensors. Colonel Bae Taeyong's ground forces fought the creatures that landed on the planet, using primitive explosives and hand weapons when their energy weapons failed. The swarm had learned to counter advanced technology, but they had never fought an enemy that would willingly use inferior weapons if those weapons worked better in specific situations. "The swarm thinks like a machine," Admiral Lee explained as his fleet regrouped for another attack. "It calculates the most efficient way to win, but humans do not fight efficiently. We fight desperately. We fight with everything we have, even when it makes no logical sense." Through her window, Nithara could see the tide of battle changing. The swarm creatures, for the first time in their existence, seemed uncertain. They moved more slowly, their formations less perfect. Some even retreated when faced with human attacks that they could not understand or predict. "Admiral," Captain Park reported, "swarm forces are pulling back from the evacuation zones. Civilian transports are getting through." Lee nodded grimly. "Then we have done what we came here to do. But the real fight is just beginning." Above them, the swarm's main fleet was arriving, and these creatures had been learning from the battle. They would be harder to surprise, harder to confuse, but the humans were ready. They always were. The real horror began when the swarm's main fleet arrived. Nithara had thought the scout forces were terrifying, but these new creatures were beyond nightmare. Bioships the size of cities dropped out of hyperspace, their hulls covered in weapons that pulsed like beating hearts. They had learned from the earlier battle, growing new defenses against every tactic the humans had used. "All civilian ships, this is Admiral Lee," came the broadcast across all channels. "You have 10 minutes to reach minimum safe distance. We will hold them here." Major Yoon Seojin commanded the heavy cruiser Mountain's Edge, one of the largest ships in the human fleet. As the swarm's primary hive ship moved toward the evacuation routes, She made a decision that would be remembered across the galaxy. "Admiral, I can ram the hive ship's main reactor," she reported, her voice steady despite what she was proposing. "My ship's reactor is already damaged from the last engagement. If I overload it at the right moment." "Seojin, no," Admiral Lee's voice cut through the static. "There has to be another way." "Sir, there are 300,000 civilians on those transports," Seojin replied. "They need time to reach hyperspace. This is the only way to give it to them." Through the communication channel, Nithara could hear the other human officers trying to find alternatives, but the math was simple and cruel. The hive ship was too big, too well defended. It would reach the civilian convoy before they could escape. "It has been an honor serving with you, Admiral," Seojin said quietly. The mountain's edge turned toward the massive swarm vessel, its engines burning at maximum power. The hive ship's defensive weapons opened fire, tearing holes in the human cruiser's hull, but Seojin kept flying forward, for Earth, she whispered as her ship struck the alien reactor core. The explosion was visible from 3 star systems away. The hive ship died in a chain reaction of secondary blasts, taking with it the coordination center for half the swarm fleet. But it also took Major Yoon, Seojin, and her crew of 800. "They are all dead," Nithara said, watching the expanding fireball. "She killed them all, to save us." "She saved them," Admiral Lee corrected, his voice heavy with grief. "Every single civilian who escapes because of her sacrifice." But the battle was far from over. On the planet's surface, Colonel Bei Taiyang's ground forces faced impossible odds. Swarm creatures had landed near the last evacuation site, trying to prevent the remaining civilians from reaching their ships. The humans had run out of heavy weapons an hour ago. Now they fought with whatever they could find: construction tools, chemical explosives, even rocks and metal bars. When Bei's ammunition ran low, he ordered his soldiers to use their own bodies as shields to protect the fleeing civilians. "Colonel, fall back to secondary positions," came the order from Admiral Lee. "Negative, sir," Bei replied, firing his last plasma charge at a creature that looked like a metal spider the size of a building. "If we move, they break through to the evacuation point. We hold here." Nithara watched through the tactical displays as human soldiers threw themselves at monsters 3 times their size. They died by the dozens. But every death bought precious minutes for the civilians behind them. The swarm had adapted to human weapons, but they could not adapt to human determination. In space, Captain Moon Hyjin's destroyer, Indomitable Spirit, continued fighting even after losing half its hull to swarm bioacid. The ship's rear section was gone, atmosphere venting into space, but the front weapons still worked. "Captain Moon, your ship is breaking apart," Admiral Lee warned. "Abandon immediately." "Sir, I still have forward guns and 30% power," Moon replied calmly. "There are still civilians in the outer system. Someone needs to cover their retreat." The Indomitable Spirit limped through space, trading shots with swarm vessels, 10 times its size. Every hit should have finished the destroyer, but somehow Moon kept her ship fighting. When the main engines failed, she used thruster power. When the main guns died, she used emergency weapons. When those ran out, she rammed enemy ships with her damaged hull. "Why does she not retreat?" Nithara asked, tears streaming down her face as she watched the human captain's hopeless fight. "Because someone has to stand," Admiral Lee answered simply. "That is what we do. When everyone else runs, someone has to stand." The tide turned when the swarm made its greatest mistake. The alien hive mind tried to adapt to human tactics by becoming more aggressive, more willing to take losses. They began fighting like humans, reckless, desperate, willing to die. But that was exactly what Admiral Lee had been waiting for. "All ships, execute Crazy Horse Protocol," he ordered. The human fleet suddenly scattered in all directions, each ship acting independently. To any logical observer, it looked like they were fleeing in panic, The swarm, now programmed to be aggressive, chased them. That was when the trap closed, hidden in the asteroid belt. Human ships that had been playing dead for hours suddenly came to life. The swarm had flown directly into the center of a carefully planned ambush, their formations broken by the pursuit. The final battle lasted 3 hours. When it was over, the swarm's queen ship was burning wreckage, its death scream echoing across space as the hive mind collapsed into confusion. The surviving bioships fled into dark space, carrying with them something they had never experienced before: fear. But victory had cost the human fleet dearly. Half their ships were destroyed, thousands of brave souls lost as the last swarm vessel disappeared into hyperspace. Nithara realized she had witnessed something that would change the galaxy forever. 3 months after the battle, Ambassador Nithara stood before the greatest gathering in galactic history. The council chamber on Nexus Prime held representatives from over 200 species, their various forms filling the massive crystalline hall. Some floated in energy fields, others sat on specially designed chairs, and a few existed as pure thought patterns displayed on holographic screens. But every single one of them was looking at her. "Honored representatives," Nithara began, her skin glowing with patterns of determination, "you all know why we are here. For 3 months, I have listened to debates about the human problem. Some call them dangerous. Others say they are too unpredictable for civilized society." Murmurs rippled through the chamber. The ethereal dominion's representative, a being of pure light, flickered with disapproval. The humans' methods were ... excessive. Their tactics violated 17 different codes of warfare. "Their tactics saved my people," Nithara replied firmly. "When your perfect battle computers calculated that helping us was impossible, they came anyway." She gestured to the massive viewing screen behind her, which showed images of the rebuilt Zephyrian worlds. Cities of crystal and metal rose from ground that had been poisoned by the swarm, their spires gleaming in the light of their twin suns. "Look at these worlds," she continued. 6 months ago, they were dead. The void swarm had consumed everything, leaving only empty rock and toxic waste. Today, 3 billion Zephyrians live and work and raise their children because humans were willing to die for strangers. The Silicon Hegemony's robotic ambassador spoke in its mechanical voice. The humans lost 53% of their fleet. From a logical standpoint, their victory was extremely inefficient. Nithara's patterns flared bright with anger. Inefficient. Major Yoon Seojin destroyed a hive ship by ramming it with her cruiser, saving 300,000 civilian lives. Colonel Bei Taiyong and his soldiers died holding a single evacuation point so children could escape. Captain Moon Haijin fought her ship until it was falling apart rather than abandon her duty. She paused, letting her words sink in. "You call this inefficient. I call it the most beautiful thing I have ever witnessed." The ancient Wardenser representative, a creature that looked like a living tree made of silver, spoke in a voice like wind through leaves. "We do not question their courage, Ambassador. But their homeworld classification remains. Death World, Class 12. They are dangerous by nature." "Yes," Nithara agreed, surprising the chamber. "They are dangerous. Do you know why? Because they grew up on a planet that tried to kill them every single day. Ice ages, volcanic eruptions, massive storms, predators, diseases that could wipe out entire populations." She touched a control, and new images appeared on the screen. Earth, in all its terrible beauty, hurricanes that could destroy cities, earthquakes that split continents, winters that lasted for months. "Most species would have died on such a world," she continued. "But humans did not just survive, they learned to fight back. They learned that sometimes the only way to protect what you love is to risk everything you have." A new voice spoke from the gallery, Admiral Lee Daeho himself, representing humanity for the first time at a galactic council meeting. He looked older than when Nithara had first met him, worn down by the weight of all the lives lost in the battle. Honored representatives, he said quietly, we did not come to your galaxy looking for war or conquest. We came because someone asked for help, and we could not ignore that call. Your methods are unpredictable, the ethereal representative complained. How can we trust allies whose actions we cannot calculate? Admiral Lee smiled sadly. You cannot predict us because we do not fight for profit, or territory, or even survival. We fight for an idea that most species seem to have forgotten, that all life has value, and that protecting others is worth any sacrifice. The Crystal Confederation's ambassador, a being made of living diamond, chimed like a bell. But what happens when your methods fail? What if your willingness to die is not enough? Then we die, Lee answered simply. But we die trying. That is better than living while others suffer. The vote, when it came, was closer than Nithara had hoped. Some species still feared humanity's unpredictable nature. Others worried about what might happen when humans applied their chaotic fighting style to galactic politics. But in the end, the images of rebuilt Zephyrian cities spoke louder than fear. The motion passed. Humanity would be granted full membership in the Galactic Council, with all the rights and responsibilities that entailed. As the session ended and the various representatives began to file out, Nithara found herself standing beside Admiral Lee on the observation deck, looking out at the stars. Do you think we made the right choice? She asked him, inviting humans into galactic society. Lee was quiet for a long moment, watching ships from 100 different worlds move through the space lanes around Nexus Prime. Ask me again in a few years, he said finally. When the next crisis comes, when the next enemy appears, that everyone says is too dangerous to fight, and then you will have your answer. Because we will be there, just like we were for you. Far out in the dark space between galaxies, something stirred. The Void Swarm was adapting, learning, preparing for another assault on the civilized worlds. But this time, they would face an enemy they had never encountered before, a species that fought not with logic or efficiency, but with hope.